Then chapter 2, what's it about? The two words. Favoritism and faith in that order. So I'm trying to keep them in order so that you know this is the first half of, chapter 1 or chapter 2. Favoritism and faith. Very good. And then, let's do this thing. See what happens. Will it work? Yes. All right. So, click, clickety, click, click. It's not doing the click. All right. What's chapter 3 about? Words and wisdom. Again, in that order, helps you remember. What's James chapter 3 about? It's about words. All right, let's do the thing since it's not doing it. Words and wisdom. So words and wisdom, chapter 3, everybody together. Chapter 3 is words and wisdom. Okay, so we're going to be talking about words today. And then chapter 4, pride and priorities, which we'll get to. Chapter 5, patience and prayer. And then, again, I think we might dive into some other things later on. So, all right, let's turn to James chapter 3, verse 1. And I need somebody to read it. But first, words is also known as what? What's another word that starts with an S for words? Speech, right? So it's not just about words, but often our words come from our mouths. Now, can words come not from our mouths? Yes? In what way? So our body speaks, true, sign language. My kids and I are trying to learn. And wouldn't you guess it, it's kind of natural. This means chicken. Anyways. All right, so Henry, you said yes on like how our words can be more than just speech. What else? Did you have something in mind on that? No, that's okay. I was curious. What about what you're doing right now? Are you writing words? So what we write is another way of speaking. So everything that we're talking about tonight is more than just, hey, the words that I speak, but what I write down. And later on, if you get on a social media website or app of some kind, those words matter too. Okay, so whether they're words on a keyboard or you're writing them down or they're coming out of your mouth or your body language is speaking words, absolutely. So and there's maybe others I've forgotten, but very good. Okay, so words are speech, and we can speak in a lot of different ways. And so every way in which we talk about our speech, that's what we're covering. All right, somebody read verse 1. Quickly. Chapter 3, verse 1. Yes. All right, good. Thank you very much. All right, so we're going to talk about this verse in greater detail, but what does this verse tell us about our words? It tells us something about teaching. It says that if you're teaching, you'll have a stricter judgment, right? Notice that word. So what does that mean for those who don't teach and just speak normally in writing or words that we speak to one another? Doesn't that indicate we're going to have judgment too? But there's a stricter judgment, and again, you have questions about what that means. I'm going to need to study it more to know for sure. But he says there's a stricter judgment for those who are teaching, and there's a reason for that. But what that also means is that we'll be judged by our words. For example, everybody turn to Matthew chapter 12. These would be really good to memorize, or at least memorize this, reference. Matthew 12. And I want to get it right. I know the idea of where it is. Okay. Somebody else who hasn't read, when you get there, Matthew 12, verse 36 and 37.
Tell you that men will have to give an account on the day of judgment for every careless word they have
All right, thank you. So, every idle word that we speak, we will give account of it in the day of judgment. God's keeping track in a sense. And of course, as we're forgiven, as was talked about tonight, that he will, erase those things. But when it comes to those things that are not repented of and not covered by the blood of Jesus, then we need to realize that we'll be judged by what we speak. And those are the words of Jesus right there, right? If they're in red. And so we need to realize how important our words are. All right, so let's take a look back at James. Go back to James chapter 3. That's probably the only flipping through the Bible we'll do tonight. So go back to James chapter 3, and then somebody else read verse 2.
We all stumble in many ways. Anyone who is never at fault in what they say is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check.
Yours didn't use the word. So mine uses the word bridle. It says, if anyone does not stumble in word, he's a perfect man or complete, able also to bridle the whole body. So bridle. Let's talk about that. We have some here. But think about a horse. Now, I probably haven't seen as many horses as you have, but just living out here, I grew up in the suburbs, the city. So I knew about horses, but seeing them up close was different. What do you notice when you maybe first saw a horse? What do you notice about them? They're big, they're large, right? Certainly most of them larger than us in a lot of ways. Absolutely. Connected to that, what else might you notice about them or see in them? Maybe be fearful of. What are you told not to do? Where are you told not to go around the horse? Walk behind. Why? They have a kick that, would you say, is powerful?
Yes, I can back.
Right? So powerful, right? So when I see a horse, I see just nothing but muscles, right? And I've seen skinny horses, so they don't have as much. But I've really never seen a fat horse. I'm sure there are some. But when you look at horses, for the most part, the ones that are trained and well taken care of, they're going to have these muscles. And so there's a reason he uses this, because they would be very familiar with horses even way back then. They've used horses for thousands of years. So when you see a horse, and then what do you put on a horse to control it? What's it called? A bridle, right? Which includes the bit, right? If I'm not wrong. Okay, so no, you're right. But the bit is part of the bridle. I mean, you could probably just have one with just the bit. But the bridle goes over the whole head of the horse, right? And so he's using this as an image. So what does the horse represent here in James 3? The what? Us, or the tongue, the mouth, right? Like our language, our speech. So picture a horse like a tongue, and that kind of fits because the tongue is a muscle, right? And so you think muscle, the power that's in a horse. Well, there's great power in these things. So verse 2 tells us that we'll be complete if we bridle our tongue. And we'll be talking about the bits in just a moment. But verse 2 will be complete. We will be complete. If we control our tongue, we will be considered mature or complete in Christ. And so that also means that if we can't control our tongue, we're not ever going to be a mature Christian. That's important. That's important to know. We need to be able to control our tongue. And I'll tell you, it's a battle from when you're young even to when you're old. I haven't been super old, but I'm older than you, and I know at least up until this point, it's been a struggle. And I know many people who still struggle with it. So it's going to be a battle, and we'll see why. So if you bridle our tongue, we'll be complete. Secondly, look at verse 3. Somebody else read verse 3 quickly, chapter 3, verse 3.
Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us when we turn their whole body.
Okay, so indeed, we put bits in horses' mouth, indeed, so that we can control their whole body. So we're able, if we can control our tongue, he tells us that we can control all of ourselves, too. It's almost like the tongue is the most difficult, in a sense, to tame, to control. And so if we can do that, then he says you can do the rest of it. That's pretty nice to know. And again, if we can't control our tongues, The rest is not going to be under control, or at least it'll be a lot harder, he says. It really starts with the mouth and with the tongue. All right, now let's go backwards to James chapter 1, verse 26. I know it's not here in chapter 3, but James has some similar themes throughout the whole letter that he'll kind of bring up in 1 or 2 or 3 of the chapters. And you find this here. James 1, verse 26, I'll read. If anyone among you thinks he is religious and does not bridle, same word, his tongue, but deceives his own heart, this one's religion is useless. So he says that if we don't bridle our tongues, our religion is useless. You have another translation there that says something different than useless? Yes. Worthless. Yes, so it's worth nothing. So what if we do bridle our tongues? Will they be worthful? That's not a word, but useful, right? Will be useful, will be fruitful. You can put either of those words there on number 3. If we bridle our tongue, will be fruitful or useful. We'll bear fruit to God, and that's according to Galatians 5:23. That's the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, right? Control of self starts with the control of the tongue and the bridling of it. All right, back to chapter 3 of James. James chapter 3. Verse number 3 we just read. So now, talking about, he's going to use these 3 pictures. James and Jesus and many other writers are going to use great images. So, that's what I had here, if y'all didn't get that. Makes us complete or mature, able to control all of self, or fruitful, or you could put useful. I like that, either way. So, our words, and again, everything that we do with our words, whether they're in our minds or whether they come out of our mouths or from our hands to paper or on a keyboard or wherever they might be, all of these things are needful. All right, so Etta, show us, hand me one of the bits there. We have one here, but this is better. Okay, so where's the bit? Right here? This thing? All right, this thing right here. Okay, so tell us something about this one, about why this is the way it is. Does this do something?
Yes, so that's called force. What that does is you pull your reins back, and it pulls on the shank for one part. The one part of the reins touch you. This strap here. It'll pull on this strap here, and then that'll twist this back into the back of the horse's tongue, or up into the top of the horse's mouth, and then that'll either make him open his mouth, or it will just tuck his head back, slow him down, stop him, do it everything.
So you can, just by this tiny little thing, control a horse. But something that is in his mouth, right? There's a reason he uses this, is that we're controlling our mouths. Well, we're controlling the mouths of the horse, or using the mouth to control the whole body. I mean, there's just a greatness to this picture. So, what about another one that's different? So, the bits. There's different bits that go in for his mouth. All right, so this one. Yeah. So look at this. So how is this different from the last one?
So that's called a snaffle. It's a lot softer because it's not pushing, it's not pulling, it's not doing anything. It's just broken in the middle, and it'll just pull on the sides of the mouth. And that's for a softer mouth.
So you'll have less control with this one in a sense? Okay. So there's certain levels to bridling your tongues, right? You may have to start, maybe, does that make sense? You would start with maybe something like this.
That's what you break.
You break the horses. Okay, see, this is a great example. And so you can take a look at these maybe after class if there's a need. But there's a few different ones, right? Is there anything other that's different than these two?
This one is a very harsh.
Oh, wow, look at that. That was fun. That doesn't look fun.
So that like it's solid. There's no give, there's no take to it. It's just that's what it is.
And what might you use this on a horse for? Like, why this one over the other two?
So the horse I used that one on, he was older, but he knew his job, and all he did was just keep
So, great image, right? And no wonder because it's God speaking that, through James. And maybe James was familiar with horses. We don't know his, deal. But at the very least, we know God was. And God designed them this way. And maybe for the only reason of giving us an example to say, if you can control your mouth, then you can control your whole body just like you do a horse. And you picture, and you've seen rodeos, you've been to those, you've seen or maybe done it yourself. But you have riders that they're just, pulling on the reins in certain ways, and just, it doesn't maybe look like a lot, but they're moving that horse and telling it different things just by using its mouth. So, great example, and thank you for bringing those. Again, maybe you can look at them afterwards and see, but I just thought it's a perfect example. All right, the next example is what? Look at verse 4 and 5. Somebody read 4 and 5 real quick. Anybody? I think most everybody's read, but if you want to, you go for it.
Or take the ship's canoe. As an example, although they are so large, they are driven by strong winds, and they are steered by very small rudder, wherever the pilot wants them. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes a great boast. Consider what a great force is set on by
Okay, yeah, let's stop there. All right, so the second picture he gives is a rudder, right? The rudder on a ship. The rudder is small, but does it guide the ship? Yes, same thing as the bit. The bit's small, guides the large horse, the large powerful horse. Now, this boat is not the picture of the next one, but most boats have one similar to this. There'll be some differences, but the idea is, it's going to turn one way and cause the boat to go pretty much the other direction, but that's how they know where to go. Even such a large ship as this. Now, the rudder is bigger here, but it's certainly small compared to the ship, right? And so, again, he's using this as something so small, but yet it's so powerful, can turn the whole thing. And so he uses this as an example, or a second example. And then, verse really 5 and 6, I guess. So somebody read 6. What's our third picture from 6? Quick.
The tongue is a fire, a world is inequality. Iniquity. The tongue is so set among our members that it defies the whole body and sets on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire by hell.
All right, thank you. So 5 and 6 talk about the fire. We know a thing or two about fire, certainly recently, and even, if you lived here longer than I have, I'm sure it's not just that. But what's this a picture of? The largest fire in, Texas history? Did it start this big? No, it started with just, one little spark. I don't remember, it doesn't matter. What it started with, right? It didn't start like no one just came in and, spread like napalm everywhere or a bomb. Like that can happen and then fires everywhere immediately. This was spread over multiple days, right? And so it was almost a week, or I don't know. It was at least 4, 5, 6 days, somewhere in there. And so you think about a little fire. How much destruction did that little fire that started out, how much did it do? Great destruction, right? And so you just see how powerful. There were 2 examples there before of the power that can be controlled. And then you think about fire, and it's really hard to control, right? In that sense, we can't just, put a bridle on it. We can send out all the firefighters and do our best. But even when the wind is against us, it's going to fuel the fire. So we need to be so careful with our words. And so he uses these great things. The fire starts small, but it can grow large and destroy much. Starts small, but grows large and destroys much. All right, so now there's 3 impossible comparisons. Look at verse 11. And I keep closing my Bible, so I would read some, but somebody read verse 11 if you can. He did, yeah. Everybody has, except... All right, thank you. So, what's this picture of? A spring. Anybody ever been to a spring? Yes? So, was it a hot spring or cold spring? Which one? Hot? Been to a hot spring? Anybody been to a cold spring somewhere? So I used to go every summer to to Lakey, Texas, which is on the Frio River. And the Frio River is cold, right? That's why it's called that. But it's cold because it's spring fed, and many rivers in Texas are, and throughout the nation. So you think about a spring, and he says, what does he say here about this spring? That it's unnatural, it's impossible to have a freshwater spring and something that's bitter. So when you think about like a freshwater spring, could you drink right from the spring? Right, yes, because it's pure, right? It's right then and there. It hasn't been contaminated yet. So that's the idea of like a fresh water. Well, then bitter would basically be something that's been contaminated, or what he's going to say later on is, look at verse 12. At the end of verse 12. Thus, no spring yields both salt water and fresh. Again, that's just never happened in nature. God's never made it that way. And so what he's saying is, when it comes to the tongue, we can't be on both sides. Now, we can literally do that, but he says as a mature Christian, you're not supposed to, right? As God's people, you need to be one or the other, just like a spring is going to be one or the other. So then, look at verse 12. You have another example. There's two examples here, I think, but can a fig tree bear olives? What's the answer? So there's a picture of a spring, if you have not seen one. A fig tree here on the left. Fig tree would ever produce olives. Those look similar, but they're not the same. Is there ever a chance that naturally a fig tree would produce an olive? No. It would never, ever happen in nature. It just doesn't. That's the way God made it. And so it will never produce olives. And again, so he's saying the tongue that's supposed to produce good fruit, or the fruit that God wants us to produce, needs to be one that only produces that fruit and not the other. Now, second part of verse 12. Or does a grapevine bear figs? Anybody ever been to a grapevine, seen that before? You have? So pretty cool to go. I love grape juice, and most juice, but especially grape juice. What? Really? Maybe I'll have to go look for that. But you think about just the nature, again, that God put this in. Will there ever be a grapevine that you know is a grapevine and it somehow just produces figs? No, right? So that will never happen. And so he's saying that these things are impossible. And so when it comes to a mature Christian, someone who is pure in speech is what we should be, producing the fruit of the Spirit in all ways and in all things. So then, let's go backwards a little bit to verses 9 and 10. We kind of skipped them a little bit. And actually, let's just read from 7 to 10, and I'll read it. But read it with me. For every kind of beast, verse 7, and bird, of reptile and creature of the sea is tamed, and has been tamed by mankind. So he's saying, here's an example of animals. You can basically tame nearly every animal, is what he's saying, and even some reptiles and things in the sea. But then he says, verse 8, no man can tame the tongue. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. He says, with it we bless our God and Father, and with it we curse men who have been made in the likeness of God. Out of the same mouth proceed blessing and cursing. And then he says, my brethren, these things ought not to be so. What does it mean to ought not be so? What does ought mean? And no, I'm not talking about zero. What does it mean? Should. Basically, it's necessary. It's needful that these things don't happen. That you don't have in your words and in your speech good words towards someone and towards God, and then towards mankind you say bad words and bad things. He's saying as a Christian that should not be the case. I'm not trying to scare any of us because I'm telling you, it can be done. Now, everybody has their strengths and weaknesses, so I want that to be clear as well. But I believe this is a strength of mine, that it's taken some time to get to that point. It's also taken some time to be away from people who are using language that we shouldn't be using, to get away from being desensitized to that kind of speech, where it comes up in your mind and then you think, you know what, I'm not going to say that, but it's in your mind. Well, I'm telling you that over time, as you go away from those kinds of crowds, it won't come up in your mind anymore. And when you're not watching those kinds of entertainment, perhaps, we have to be careful what we let in, because it's going to likely come out. And so he says that when it comes to our tongue, we need to be people who are not blessing and cursing in a lot of different ways, that we need to be careful to control our tongues. So, like I said, it's I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying it can be done. Does that make sense? So don't come away from here saying that, Garrett said he can do it and it's easy. It might just be a strength of mine, and it might be a weakness for one of y'all. And so that's just the way that we are as humans, because I have weaknesses that are much harder. But this one is not necessarily, and again, it used to be a weakness, but it's something that I've worked on. And so it's important that we know how to control our tongues and our words. All right, next. On the back of the page, you have two directions that our speech sends us. And it's kind of going backwards a little bit, but verse 2 already gave us the idea. He says, if we don't stumble in word, we're a perfect person, or we're complete. And I don't want you to think that perfect is the idea of perfection like we often think about. He means complete. He means that we are doing what God requires. What He wants from us. And so the first one there is life, right? If you think about, heaven and eternal life. That's one direction in which our tongues can send us. They can send us towards heaven, towards God. That's where we want to be. And then the other direction is it can send us towards, death, or ultimately eternal death and torment in hell. And nobody wants that. God doesn't even want that for any of us. And so our tongues will lead us, as we looked at earlier. And so you can see again that, like we already saw, verse 6, it's a world of iniquity. That's the idea of sin. It's very easy to sin with the tongue. And there's a number of ways that we can kind of talk about in just a few moments about, what those sins might be. But then he says in verse 7 and 8 that it's an unruly evil, verse 8, and it's full of deadly poison. What that makes me think of is a snake, a venomous snake. What's the most venomous snake? You're a snake person. So the black mama. And then, of course, the rattlesnake, here in Texas and United States, I think is the western one is.
Actually, it's
The black king. Black king?
it's a really big, it's the green mama. No, that's not even close.
All right, we'll go look it up. But either way,
Not even close.
all right,
That's
guys, I said, all right. All right, let's, again, that's not for now, but I thought maybe we would know. But either way, we think about one who is very venomous, as in basically the moment you're bit, you have like 30 minutes or less to get to a hospital, and they might be able to save you, right? That's the kind of idea is what he's talking about here. I think there's an idea that in James's mind and in the mind of God, he's saying that the tongue is so powerful it can ruin your life in 30 minutes, depending on what you say and what you do, right? There are legal things that you can be in trouble for, slander, and things like that. You could get sued over things that you say, again, over things that maybe you post online about people, or, be careful posting about political things, that kind of stuff. So what we're not going to do, what I want you to do before next week, and I'm not requiring you to. If you say I didn't do it, I'm not going to be like, hey, I hate you or anything like that. I'll be maybe a little bit sad. But what I want you to do is the verses are there, and I want you to go in and find, not right now, but during the week, the improper uses of words and what they might mean, and then also the proper uses at the end. So That's your homework in a sense. I'd appreciate if you did it, and we'll try and talk about it if I remember. So somebody remind me to just talk about it a little bit. And then I mean, if you didn't do it, you can just fill in those words when we get there. I will say that because I'd like to go through it so that you have that. All right. So what we did last time, Christian will be excited about this.
Garrett, you
Yes.
have my extra paper from last week.
Well, I kept not finding it. It might be over here, so I was going to check. So, all right, let's do the hangman. I think this is a new word, so that's where we're going to be. And remember, this is a Bible word. So, we're going to start with a letter. And no, I didn't say, hey, you're